So I talk a lot about the opportunities that exist and buying small businesses and, doing entrepreneurship and investing and all these things. But I thought it would be cool to today talk about my biggest business regrets, the things that in my I did or didn't do that I really wish I had done a better job. Let's talk about what are my biggest regrets. Well, first big regret, not moving and staying in the city I loved, which was San Francisco. I loved San Francisco. I loved it at first sight. I moved there after college, stayed for a while, and then I moved home to Podunk, Florida. And I wish I had stayed. I was so focused back then on saving that I over optimized everything for my savings rate. I said, why would anyone live in SF when the salaries aren't high enough to justify that cost of living? And I was so focused on, I want to save, save, save. And this was when I was in my early 20s. I wish I had just shut myself up and said, go to SF because you love SF, you love the culture, you love the people, and you're going to learn stuff that you would never learn if you were back in Podunk hometown. Okay, so big regret not moving to the place where I knew I needed to be because I could have worked at Google. And that brings me to my second big regret, which was not working for the big fancy mega corp. And it's funny because I talk all the time about small business. I'm a big proponent of small business and startups and even solopreneurship. So why am I saying I regret not working for the big company? So what is FANG? Well, FANG is what we used to call it. I don't know what it's called now. They keep changing the names of these companies, but basically working for Facebook, Apple, Google, whatever. I wish I'd worked for that because, I'm an engineer, but for you, if you're a finance person, maybe that's Goldman Sachs or maybe it's the big McKinsey or something like that. So there's always these top tier positions out there. And in order to get in, you have to really do a good job in school. You have to really just jump through other hoops. And I applied to Amazon and Google and I just didn't make it. I didn't even make it through the beginning of the interview process. They pretty much ignored my resume, even though I had great grades and all these things and lots of experience. Who knows why? Maybe I just didn't get through the system. But the point is I stopped trying. And this goes back to the SF thing. I just stopped trying. I was so focused on saving and doing my own thing that I didn't want to put in that extra effort it would take to get that really big fancy job. Now, why would I want to work at Google? It's totally a terrible fit for me. I've tried working at big corps before. Lockheed was a big one, and I hated it. So why would I say I regret not working at Google or a FANG company? Because having that on my resume and having the experience and meeting the people and even for a year or two, it would have been good just to live amongst really smart, really successful people. It would have changed the way I think about things, I'm sure of it. And maybe I would have been more successful, maybe less successful, but I really just wish I had done it because without that, I kind of have a biased view towards small business, which is what I did. Instead of working for Google, I went and worked at a tiny startup. So I still think that's a great move, working for a startup, but I wish I had done that one extra thing, worked for that big corp, got those extra, reps in, joined the volleyball team, whatever, just had some fun. Because I probably would be friends with some people who I had met at Google. They have these big cultures at these big corps. And culture is something that's really important to me these days. So what else? So not doing my VC-backed startup. So like any person, I had this game-changing startup idea and I prototyped it and I was a developer, but I couldn't sell it and I couldn't find that right co-founder. And I was in Boulder, not SF, and I just didn't fully commit. I thought I would try it myself. I didn't listen. I didn't do what they said. And so basically when the time came to apply to the accelerators, I got a lot of interest in my startup, but I just didn't do the things I needed to do to be considered like, to get into Y Combinator. So a lot of people in my shoes would have gone into Y Combinator and then, built $1 billion company. And in fact, there's a company today, Active Pieces, that basically does what I was trying to do back then when I was building Native Sync. It was an embedded API integration platform, which of course today would have been massive if I had stuck to it. So if you have an idea in something you're really passionate about, I think you need to execute. That's what I regret, not executing. And in general, not trusting myself more, right? So if I had put more trust into myself and committed more, I would have probably had some more successes. However, quitting early actually probably led me to having more experiences. I still would say having a little bit more of a commitment would have been good. Obviously, a big regret is not doing networking and social media. I was an introvert. There's so many reasons I didn't want to be a center of attention. I never did Twitter. I never did networking. I thought, I'm going to be a coder forever, leave me alone, pay me a lot, and let me build shit. And I had just kind of a myopic view that that's who I was. If I had been more of a networker at an earlier age, I'm sure things would have worked out really well for me. And of course, I would have realized it's like the best way to actually build a business. And final regret, this one's pretty common, selling too early. I was, I had a portfolio company that eventually did take off. I, was really set up to make a lot of money. And we had some tough times. And I did the calculus in my head and said, I already hit my retirement number with this company. It could go under. I'm just going to kind of sell out now and, take whatever I can. And I did that not once. As a rule, I would always sell at the earliest possible time so I could de-risk and lock down that money. And that allowed me to constantly grow my net worth, at a ongoing rate. But it led me to, selling equity that obviously could have been worth a lot more and would have been very, very life-changing if I had stuck around. And of course, that company today is worth a lot of money. So I made the wrong decision. I also made the wrong decision with crypto because I bought a bunch of crypto in 2012 and I was a crypto user for all of the 2010s and I sold it all, pretty quickly, but I don't believe in crypto anyway, personally, these days. I'll talk about that in another video, but I would say that selling too early, over optimizing for taking chips off the table, bad move. So I was very it's either money in my hand or it's not real. And I was always focused on getting that, the liquidation. Okay, so bonus round. What did I do right? Right? Because, obviously, everyone has their own path and, we can all look at our mistakes, but the reality is everyone does what they're meant to do. What I did, I actually was pretty successful in spite of myself by starting my career by saving regularly and being frugal and working hard. So I worked hard. I got promotions. I saved almost all my money. I lived super cheap in a college town in Florida for $500 a month rent with roommates, rode my bike to work kind of cheap. And I saved a lot of money. And that gave me the nest egg to do the next thing I did right, which was leave my 9-to-5. I had this really rapidly growing startup that I was a part of, and I had some equity and it liquidated, but I could have kept going and stayed on, but I got rid of all that security blanket and I tried my own thing for years. So I left the 9-to-5 and gave myself space to pursue other things. And I think that's really something I did right, especially doing it earlier rather than waiting. If I'd waited, and just focused on saving, I wouldn't be where I am today. So I felt like the biggest risk was losing my peace, losing my life, losing my growth opportunities, being bored, stagnating, to me, those were the real risks that I felt. And so to me, quitting my job so I could focus on other things was the right choice. And basically I got by being a freelancer when I wasn't doing a startup. So I basically quit the 9 to 5 at age 24 and never looked back. And I'm 34. So what was the next thing? Figuring out how to trade my skills for equity. That was key. Because I had this initial view that I was just a developer, and luckily I had a lot of confidence in my abilities. So I learned that I could negotiate for equity, and I negotiated some really strong equity positions on almost everything I did, and learning how to get equity and then what that entails, like learning that you're not just going to get an equity grant for nothing. You're going to have a cliff, and those cliffs will bite you, and the vesting periods will bite you. So learning how all that stuff works so that I could get the equity and actually get paid for what I did. Several times I've been burned by VC-backed companies with cliffs and vesting periods. Learning that that's the game and just that you have to work with it. So, learning how much equity an advisor should get versus an early contributor versus a full-time employee, and, where you really have the ability to negotiate. Got lots of experience with that. And so that's key, learning how to go for the equity, how equity works. So you're not always just approaching it with a really naive mentality that it's always going to work out. And then, of course, having the, strength to actually focus on those equity positions and stick with it at least long enough to get to some liquidity. Sometimes that happened. Sometimes I left too early, like I said. But what I did right was I tried year after year. And that's another thing I would say I did right was it was kind of compulsive, but I always was looking for that next thing, the next startup, the next project. And so I just kind of made a lifestyle out of it. And I didn't think I would keep doing things year after year, but I did, and kind of became who I am. So if I had gone back to a 9 to 5, then, that wouldn't have worked out as well. So I stuck to entrepreneurship, left that 9 to 5, never really went back. Tried, spent a couple months at this or that company, but really just never went back. And then another thing I did right that I think is really key is that I didn't limit myself by my experience or my skills. I was very focused on learning new things and just getting as much experience as I could. So I started out as just a back-end server developer, but then I got experience in infrastructure, and then front-end, and then design, and then product, and then project management. And so all these different skills, I didn't master them, but I learned enough. And then I started learning about strategy and marketing and partnerships. And so I didn't limit myself and say, I only do this. I was always willing to learn and try to do something new, because really it was just fun to do new things. But I think that's a key thing when you're looking at an entrepreneur is, how much are they willing to dive into something that they don't feel confident in? Like I dove into sales. So how does an engineer end up diving into sales? You really just got to just not limit yourself. So that's what I did right. So to kind of recap some things I regret: not living in the city I loved, not working for that big corporation at least once, selling too early, not doing that company that I really had a great idea and should have, not trusting myself more, and not doing more networking and social media. Things that I did right: focusing on saving early, leaving that security blanket of the 9 to 5 as soon as I could, figuring out how equity works and how to trade my skills and time for equity. I kept trying even after tons of abject failures, and I never limited myself by my experience or my skill set, and I made a game out of learning new things. So that's a little bit about how my 20s went. I would love to hear how yours went and what your biggest regrets are and what your biggest successes are. See you soon.